We lost one of the best to ever do it, one of the original voices of drag racing, Dave McClelland. Incredible. I don't even know that we can properly give credit to what he did for our sport, the role he served, whether it was on the television. I mean, this guy was a racer as well. He managed a racetrack. He was involved with numerous different drag racing related things, magazines, and everything in between. He also, I mean, his voice was so synonymous with drag racing. I mean, you could call up, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but like jegs.com, dial up 1-800-JEGS. You get put on hold or you wait for somebody and you're hearing Dave McClelland talk to you. I mean, he was the on hold message for 100 different companies. His voice, I mean, he's the guy that in so many ways, his call of drag racing was an absolute difference maker. I think anybody who's ever picked up a microphone and talked about drag racing is measuring themselves against Dave McClelland.
Well said, man. This guy, he narrated my youth. I feel like you cannot watch any of these classic clips of NHRA racing without hearing Dave McClelland. This is like a silent clip we're watching right now, and I can just hear his voice.
I mean, I think he did a couple of things that was like, hello, everybody. Like that was his go-to introduction. I think I would get chills. I have chills right now hearing him say 2 words, hello, everybody. But then you start to talk about or bring up whenever he would make a call on a record run. There's a clip here that we were watching a moment ago of Kenny Bernstein going 270 miles per hour in a funny car for the first time in the Budweiser funny car. And his delivery of that stat, I mean, he's saying a speed. We hear it done all the time, right? But the way he did it in the enthusiasm and passion, and I think respect, admiration, appreciation that he has for it. 270 miles an hour. And
he sounded so impressed. He sounded like he was in reverence of these guys doing this stuff, and that added to it. I think a lot of times we hear, I mean, a lot of the best announcers are kind of that same mentality. But you have to have. It's not about you. As big as Dave's voice was, and as iconic as he became, just humble to a core, and it was never about him. It was about the sport, and it was about the racers on track, and you could just sense that in every call that he made.
I love the admiration that you would hear in his voice. You know, you talked about it, not making it about himself and keeping that like bright-eyed, bushy-tail enthusiasm. I don't admit to have known Dave McClelland personally. I did not. Talked to him a handful of times. There was a great photo that I posted on my social earlier this week of him looking at a copy of Drag Illustrated. We used to do this. We used to do this single page. Shout out to Ian Talker. We used to do this section in the magazine, which I honestly think we should bring back, but it was called Look Who's Reading Drag Illustrated. And I remember we bumped into Dave McClelland in the Tower of Rockingham Dragway. He was there as a guest announcer at an American Drag Racing League event. And what an opportunity, an icon at the time, a living legend. And it's like, hey man, would you mind opening up this magazine and acting like you're reading it so we can get a picture of it? And he didn't think twice about it. Really, really incredible moment for me. And like I said, I don't admit to have known the man personally, but I appreciate the way he brought a youthful enthusiasm. You would hear him talk about racing, and it was as if he'd never seen it before. Every time he didn't have that jadedness that I think all of us at times are guilty of, right? Where you just get a little bit numb to what's going on out there, and you fail to realize how big this moment may be for the person that's having it or the team that's having it. They may have worked their entire lives for that 270 mile an hour run. I mean, if you're watching along on Facebook or YouTube, and I would encourage you to look up, I actually just typed into YouTube earlier this week, Dave McClelland highlights, and there are innumerable videos on YouTube that really show this man at his best. But there's a couple moments that stood out to me where he brought to the table, I mean, it was literally like the first time he'd ever seen a funny car on track every time he talked about one. And when he made the call, Dale Poldy, gosh dang it, I'm drawing blank on his name. The crew involved with Kenny Bernstein's funny car team in this video, they're hugging, high-fiving, looking teary-eyed, and you can just tell Dave McClelland gets it. He was a guy that knew and appreciated the battle that group of
You're
people
looking
had
for
fought.
Dale Armstrong.
Dale Armstrong, thank you.
Yep.
Very much. Longtime crew chief of Kenny Bernstein, both in Funny Car and Top Fuel. But I appreciate that. And one of the clips that we don't have in here, because I actually, unfortunately, just found it this morning. Do you guys know that Dave McClelland did a little racing himself?
I saw that clip of him racing with Roy Hill.
Yes, man. I mean, I watched a video interview that Bobby Bennett over at competitionplus.com did. He did an episode of Storytellers. It's a very well-known video series that Bobby's been doing for years, where he sits down and shares war stories with these racing legends. And I took some notes from it because Bobby asked him an interesting question. He said, if Dave McClelland wasn't an announcer, what would Dave McClelland have been? And McClelland's answer surprised me, but it basically told me everything I need to know about this man. His response was, I'd probably go racing a lot more. And I'm just curious who else that's currently involved with NHRA or, I mean, in a lot of these sanctions and series, when asked what would they do if not what they're doing, would the answer be go racing? Right? I mean, that says a lot. Most of the people that are involved, especially in positions of authority, positions of power, if they won the lottery, they're not going drag racing, right? They don't get, you know what I mean? They don't have that kind of connection to it. And I think about how Dave McClelland openly admits that he would go racing. If he had the time, he would go racing more. And that, to me, is a difference maker.
Yep.
That's his passion. He has a real, authentic passion for the sport of drag racing. It
would say,
wasn't just where he's at this weekend.
I would say the person that reminds me the most of that is Brian Loans. I think that he would have a similar answer to that. And Brian is the voice of drag racing for this generation.
Agreed.
And I think that Dave was obviously the voice for really our generation. I think people in our age group before people younger than us, and moving forward, Brian is that guy passing the torch. I think from Dave to Brian is a good move for drag racing. I think that now we're fully ready to embrace Brian as the voice of drag racing. And we've actually got a very special tribute to Dave written by Brian coming up in the next issue of Drag Illustrated. So I think that that'll be a really cool piece that you guys want to check out as well.